if blacks in the United States of America are 30% more likely to get ill from the CCP virus due to racism, then men worldwide are 50% more likely to die due to... So apparently, the CCP virus is racist. This might be a surprise to some of you. And I'm not talking racist like the actual horrific levels of racism that you're seeing happening in China itself, in Guangzhou province and other places, but Guangzhou province in particular, in particular, there's this song Particular by Major Lazer and I think Jadenia is in it, and I'm forgetting who else. Let me check who else is in it. Okay, so it's Particular by Major Lazer, DJ Mafurisa, and this is Particular, Particula, featuring Nasty C, Ice Prince, Pato Ranking, and Judenia. Now, there's one thing about this. I'm talking about this racism, this particular kind of racism. It's a really good song. It's like, I like it in particular. It's talking about a particular thing that is liked, that is popular by certain people. And with this racism, there's a particular thing that happens in certain groups of people when certain things come up, and then they point out those differences and say it's in specific an example of racism, an example of sexism, an example of all these other isms that are in there, this identity politics thing. And with this song, this is a very popular song. Major Lazer is like Diplo, DJ Mafurisa is a South African artist, Judenia is a popular American artist. So you have these different people coming from different places, like Nasty Ice, Ice Prince, Pato Ranking. I'm not going to check, but I'm pretty sure these are people from Africa and other places like that. So when you have a situation right now with the CCP virus, you have a time that I've said this is going to be something to unify people. People can look at this one thing and compare it across the board. So we're being told that in the United States of America, they've looked to some places with predominantly black American populations. And blacks, as I've mentioned before, I think when they say black, they're talking about the specific tribe of people, mostly descendants of slaves who live in the United States of America. And I guess they can also count some of them in Europe, some of them in South America, some of them in the Caribbean, some of them in those areas, but they hardly actually talk about the plight of actual Negroes, actual sub-Saharan African black people of that sense. It is not normally talked about in the same light. It is normally taken what is happening to the blacks in the United States of America is a lot worse than any issues that black people anywhere else in the world might be happening, even comparatively. So they go to these couple of cities. Specifically in this one, I was talking about Louisiana. And with Louisiana and St. Louis, I think they talked about Atlanta, Georgia, they talked about places like New York, they were talking about places like Chicago that have higher populations of black American communities. The density, the percent of those cities, the percent of those areas has higher populations of blacks than the around 14% that it is nationally. But in these areas, I think Chicago in specific, don't quote me on this, but there was something like 35% blacks, but 70% of the people who were found to be positive with the virus were African American, were black. So this, of course, was being touted as an example of racism, an example of structural racism that has for long kept black people away from getting access to appropriate or similar or equitable forms of healthcare, information about healthcare, about caring for themselves better. They were also maligned and put into these essential jobs. They were put into jobs where they were frontline workers. And I'm not just talking about nurses and things like that. They're talking about, oh, these are the ones who have to work at the grocery stores, have to work at these places where they can't just work from home like all these other wealthy other groups, all these preferred white people, they're the ones who can work from home. The black people still have to be out there on the front lines. And also when you go to the public sector, blacks make up 18.1% of the public sector permanent workforce. Now, this is a permanent workforce. If you're counting people who are in on part-time, there's also a higher percentage of that. I think this is actually saying that, let me see here, this is notably greater than the percentage of the civilian labor workforce that is comprised by minorities. To focus on this topic a bit, let me read you this from fedweek.com, which is the percentage of minorities in the federal workforce increased by 0.4% to 35.3% in fiscal year 2014, which was up from 2013, which was 34.9%. And they say it's notably greater than the percentage of the civilian labor workforce, that is comprised by minorities, which is 32.5%. So the federal workforce is 18.1% Black, 8.4% Hispanic, 5.6% Asian, 0.4% Native Hawaiian Pacific Islander, 1.7% American Indian or Alaskan Native, 1.2% non-Hispanic multiracial, and 64.7% white. Minorities as a whole constituted of 35.3% of the federal workforce. So when it comes to this, there have been certain essential jobs being declared by the government that doesn't necessarily apply to federal workers in the same way. I saw some protests saying this. Somebody in saying was just like, hey, some of these government employees are saying our jobs are non-essential and shutting down our businesses. But then you look on the other side and they're still getting their paychecks, so you can understand why they might be okay with the continuation of it. And this is a thing that I also think of when you talk about the voting patterns. You look at the percent of Black women that are reliant on welfare and social services and also employed by the government, then that explains some of the voting patterns, some of the concerns. But if it's 18.1% is working for the federal government, and then you turn around and it's 14% of the population, is this meaning there is some kind of pro-Black racism? When you have Hispanics being a higher percent of the population, I just checked, 18% of the population, yet they're only 8.4% of the federal workforce. Does that mean the government is biased against Hispanics? Does it want to hire Hispanics? And I actually checked with the Black population, and the discrepancy is even bigger. It's 12.6% of United States of America is Black. So what do they explain this discrepancy on? Do they say this is some kind of reverse racism? Are they racist against Hispanics and giving the Black people Hispanic jobs? Is that what people would say in this? I don't think so. But in some convenient situations, all of a sudden it is racism that is to blame for this situation. Now, this led to a really grand exchange in one of the pressers, which I suggest you should be watching these pressers, not simply for the information being shared, the actual practical information, direct information about the CCP. But for me, it's more about the social commentary, the interactions of seeing the dynamics that have been going on in United States of America politics and just politics in general, just different interactions people have and the way people react to things. You can get certain things happening immediately and then go around and get reactions from a lot of people, and you can kind of tell and see how different things happen for the same reasons. Different reactions happen for the same words that are being said for the same press conference. So there's this one beautiful, in my opinion, interaction between Yamiche Alcindor, who is a reporter, I think, for PBS or something, and the Jerome Adams, who is the Surgeon General of the United States of America. This is the top medical officer in the United States of America. I think he also served in the military, if I'm not. Yeah, he was a vice admiral in the U.S. Public Health Commissioned Corps. And he's also an anesthesiologist, which is, I think, the people who do the anesthesia, the people who give you the pain medication, which is a difficult position to be in for the little I know about the medical field. It's very dicey to get the right amount of pain medication to people, and it's a very useful thing. So, there's a lot of things he's done, of course. He's going to be talking a lot, but there's something he talked about in particular. He was talking about how the Black American situation is an issue. Because it started coming up in the news, and then this is one thing I've noticed. Something comes up in the news, it's covered the next day by Donald Trump and his group and the people that he brings up there on the panel, and then the next day, the media jumps to something else or downplays what he said positive about this, or just pokes holes into the thing. I've seen this repeatedly. With this, it came up, oh, blacks are being affected by this. This is an example of how racist the United States of America is. Then the next couple of days, you have Donald Trump coming out and saying, we know about this. This is very troubling. We're going to actually look at this. We're going to look into details. The news is saying, you're not giving enough details. What's the details? What's the information? Then Jerome Adams comes up in one press conference, and he comes out and he says, look, you've got to be more careful with this social distancing thing. Think about it. Get the research. Protect your granddaddy, your abuela, your grandpappy or something, your grandmommy or something like this. And then the next day, Yamiche Alcindor comes out and says, why would you use these words? This is paraphrasing. Why would you use these words? Is this kind of patronizing of these people? Then the guy's like, hey, that's what I call my grandparents. I have friends who call their grandmother grandmommy. I'm just talking to my community off of my lived experience, and that was supposedly racist. He talks about how you should avoid alcohol. You should avoid certain things in this time. And then people were like, why are you focusing on only black people? Should white people avoid alcohol as well? She actually asked, should other people avoid these things? And the guy's like, yes, but maybe, just maybe, Just maybe, part of the reason some of the people were actually getting these things is because they weren't avoiding these things. If other places are avoiding it, they could be a thing that comes down to actual choices that's leading to these discrepancies. Not everything is racist. When you have videos of different blacks in urban areas congregating in house parties and street parties, block parties, and things like this, do you hear PBS talking about this? I don't know. Has Yamiche Alcindor covered this? Has she told these people they should go back home in different ways? I don't know. But this is the selective coverage of things that you see in situations like this. With this situation, with this CCP virus, it's been shown that globally, men are dying at 50% higher. Now, this goes along with part of the thing, if you want to bring the workforce into it, this goes along with men having over 90%, I think, of workplace deaths are men. So now when you're talking about these essential workers, what percent of these essential workers are actually still out there male? Is it discussed that there is something wrong about this global society that we have men on the front lines in this situation? But no, men are expected to be on the front lines of war. Men are expected to go out there and put their bodies on the line for the greater society. That's why it's not considered sexist. That's why people are not going to focus it in that kind of way. And we're talking death. Death, not illness, not just being found positive with it, dying from it. That's coming from all around the world. This virus is not racist. It doesn't select by genes, at least what we know so far. There were some conspiracy theories earlier on that it might have been targeted for certain groups. Even early on, there was somebody on Saturday Night Live just joking around, oh, black people don't get the virus. This was a trope. This was enough to be a meme to go around that some black people were saying, oh, we don't get the virus. So this was that called out for being racist. And then to finish off with this particular song, why do people focus on certain particular issues? And with this song, one thing I liked about it was it's been brought around. It's been a song that's very popular here in Kenya. And my dad was singing it. I know Major Lazer from before, and it's like it's going around the world. People know this from different kind of aspects and places, and are familiar with different places, and getting aware of what's happening in other countries, in other places, to other people. What do other people like? What do other people listen to? We can show that we can have that in common. But now with this situation, it's also the comparison. You can see this song and say, look, this song is good in Africa. These are good artists. We also have good artists in other places of the world. Let's focus on the entire world. Let's not just say, let's just be on this one place. Now with this situation, you can focus and say, and on this, I'll tip my hat to the international news that I've been watching. They have picked up this story from Guangzhou. They've picked up this story from that McDonald's that had an actual sign literally saying, don't let black people into this restaurant. The videos of people being thrown out and things like that. I give big ups to ADV China and Serpenta ZA and this Lohi or something, his partner. They do this podcast together. They've been covering it, getting live video from people they knew. It's not just black Africans. It's all Africans that are being treated this way. Serpenta ZA is white South African from Dutch ancestry, and he has a friend out there that's also white South African, shared some video directly of the things that are still going on, specifically targeting them, and then China's kind of backpedaling. And I don't think China is doing it specifically because they're like, we really hate these people. I don't think there's any love lost between China and Africans. I think they're using them as tools. It's just a practical kind of interaction, I think, with most people, which is common. It's transactional between a lot of people. It doesn't need to get into racism and this and this. But I do think there is a more racial bent to the culture in China than it is in the United States of America. At least it's more accepting of some of these things. Some of the things that I've seen going on in China would not make it past any politicians, any governmental politician's door. I know in Virginia they still kept on that one governor that was taken with the KKK photos. There is some kind of double standard with Democrats and Republicans on this. But in general, even a Democrat would not think to do this. In fact, the Democrats are the ones who try to curry favor with the minorities. And Republicans are said to hate black people, but I haven't seen the actual evidence of that actually existing. And even if they did, they understand that would not fly in their population. So now people are comparing. What is the issue? The news is covering this issue of what's happening with Africans in China a lot more than they're covering the discrepancy between the black people getting ill in the United States of America, because I think you can see that is a much bigger issue. But I think you will see to the black people in the United States of America, why I said it's a different tribe, they will be more concerned with what's happening with that discrepancy. To the people who are supposedly pro-black, they will do that, the activists and things like that. I checked one site, The Root, to see what they were covering with this. This was a few days back, and they did cover one of the stories, specifically with the McDonald's thing, but most of the people in the comment section were tying it in through their point of view. They're saying this is an example that we black people face racism all around the world. This is an example, this is proof to show that the racism they talk about in the United States of America is part of a global thing. But I think the situation happening in China is something rather different than what's going on in the United States of America. One thing that would be interesting to see, because there was one thing I saw with actual comic that was being sent out, little cartoon or infomatic that was being sent out of some Chinese people, some Asian person in a flag, in a mask, actually dragging a black person up and throwing them in the trash can. That's what I've seen covered the most, but on Sarpentier's podcast, I saw that there was also one made for white men. So they're talking about Africans, and as I mentioned, they were targeting Sarpentier's friend, who is also another white South African. What I'd be interested to see, since some of these plans include actually getting somebody's passport, holding the passport, and that's how they can track and see where these people live, I wonder if you can see if there's going to be numbers coming out to see how many Black Americans, Black Canadians, Black Europeans are also being caught up in these limitations. And do they have situations where it's just foreigners across the board? Or are they trying to actually tie in? Is the CCP trying to switch the narrative to say that this is actually coming from Africa? Now, could this be in part because there is some knowledge that Africa is going to get hit by this thing and the numbers might be higher than expected? I mean, the medical systems definitely are not anywhere as close to anything I think your average African American gets access to in the United States of America. If a policeman shoots a 13-year-old boy in the United States of America, you could bet there's going to be some racial aspect of it. If that happens here in Kenya because the kid is playing outside a curfew on his own balcony, probably not going to get that much coverage because what are you going to spin that into? Well, anyway, this could be some spin both for the local Chinese to say the CCP isn't responsible, but also when the situation gets worse in Africa, if it gets much worse, they can say, oh, this wasn't from us, we had it contained, this is an issue that was already present in Africa. And there is something very positive I saw. I shall try to link below the Serpent ZA, and if I don't link it, just go to Serpent ZA or ADV podcast, and you'll find more of this information of an ambassador from an African country to China, and she was warning, she was saying, this is unacceptable. You can't do this. You shouldn't be doing this. Why are we treated this way when we come here? Why are African people being treated this way in China when you have 10 million Chinese living in Africa? You have 10 million Chinese living in Africa. They marry in. Here in China, you're separating Africans from their spouses, from their kids. You're kicking them out of their apartments. You're putting them in this quarantine. You're treating them like subhuman, like lesser than your people in this sense. And I think the Chinese government has just over and over again just misjudged their ability to control information in the current year. And I think they're rolling it back and they're trying to check things around because this is not going to end nicely for them. This is not going to end well. It's already too late. I think this might be the actual end of the CCP. This might be the start of the end of the CCP. Well, let's see. So that's it for this video. This shorty turned into a long ramble about a lot of different topics. I'll still include this in the Shorty series, which started as a series where I took small things that I posted on social media and then tried to expand on them. I was thinking, hey, let me keep them between 3 minutes. And of late, some of them have been going longer. So I'll just keep them both in the rants and shorties. But with this one, what do you think? Do you think this is an example of structural racism? That black people are getting sick more? That are getting the virus more? Getting exposed to the virus more? Or is this more just cultural decisions? Is it things where there's higher levels of diabetes, higher levels of obesity in certain communities? I think with these, we're throwing out numbers out there that we need to wait and actually see what are the actual figures. What are the risk factors for you actually getting this virus? And I think there's going to be interesting things to find out about that. Because I don't think you can apply this and say, because more men are dying, that shows that society is racist towards men. I do think we're in a gynocentric society and we rightfully protect the females because in general the female body is more valuable in just the continuation of the human race, just on a simple biological nature level, than the male body. This is just in practical terms when it's talking about just simply reproduction. So it makes sense that we develop societies that put the protection of females as a central part of society. There's a power that females have in the sense of demanding societies do things for them. and respond to their complaints and concerns and things like that. And going back to the whole interaction with Yamit Shalsindor and Jerome Adams, the reporter and the Surgeon General, this man has achieved what he has, gone through this process, got into that position. Then the PBS reporter, who public broadcasting service, that's also a kind of tax-funded situation. He gets in there and, yeah, okay, Surgeon General is also tax-funded, but she comes in and then she says, look, this is offensive. This is offending some people. You have to answer my question. I am offended. I am offended for other people. No matter the actual work that you've done, the actual results, the actual evidence that you've put out, you must listen to my offense. You must make my offense. Answer my question. Make me unoffended. And I thought that was also just a nice little example of, I think, the dynamics that happen not just in African Americans, not just in blacks, not just in the United States of America, but globally. That whole situation of a woman demands things from the man that has achieved a lot, and then the man who's achieved a lot has to apologize for all the achievements that he's done and word it and put it in a package that is pleasing to the sensibilities of the female. Yeah, so by now you know I'm a confirmed patriarchal racist. And thanks for listening. Like, share, and subscribe if you are also a patriarchal racist and want to support patriarchal, self-hating racists. There's also merchandise on the screen, and there's a link below to the merchandise store if you have any extra money to actually buy some stuff or buy some merchandise, to check that stuff out. There's also links to PayPal if you want to help me out in that kind of way. But till next video, goodbye.